Hi, how are you? So in this video, I'm going to talk about something very, very interesting, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this story. You've probably heard this story. There's many videos about it on the internet and certainly many videos about it on YouTube. I'm talking about the most mysterious song on the internet. Now again, many of you may have heard about this. Basically, if you haven't heard about it, here's the story in a nutshell. Basically, way back in the mid-80s, around 1984, a young German man named Darius recorded a song off of the radio. Actually, he had a habit of frequently recording songs off of the radio. And this particular night, one of the songs he recorded, to this day, nobody has any idea who the artist was. Now, there are tons of theories about this. Again, if you search most mysterious song on the internet, you'll find all kinds of YouTube videos talking about this. There are many theories, a lot of speculation about who the artist might be. But to this day, almost 40 years later, nobody knows for sure exactly who the artist was. Now, in this video, I'm going to make the argument that this is not as improbable as it may seem. And I'm going to have some examples for you from my own childhood, from my own past, that I'm going to share with you that kind of illustrate that this isn't as far-fetched or as unbelievable as someone may think. Yes, I would agree that the most mysterious song on the internet, or as many people call it, like the wind, this is an extreme case. I totally agree to that. It's an extreme case because it still hasn't been solved almost 40 years later. But I would wager and I would argue that there are probably thousands and thousands of songs out there recorded on thousands and thousands of cassettes and reels of tape tucked away in boxes in people's attics and in people's basements and under people's beds. Recordings that may have been made 40, 50, even 60 years ago, containing songs that are probably mystery songs. And we certainly hear a lot nowadays about lost media. And I would argue that there's probably still a lot of songs out there tucked away on various cassette tapes, reels of tape, videotapes that probably still are mystery songs, and people probably still don't know who the artist for these songs is. Now, one thing I just want to emphasize, and you know, if you're old enough to remember what life was like before the internet, you're going to understand exactly what I'm about to say. That prior to the internet, home taping was a very common thing. And I certainly used to do it a lot. I used to record songs off the radio quite a bit with my little portable stereo back in the 80s. And I still have dozens and dozens of cassette tapes that I made way back in the day. So again, this was a very common thing, sort of taping songs off of the radio. Now, keep in mind, before the internet, if you heard a song on the radio and you didn't catch who the artist was, you couldn't run to Google and type in a couple of lines of lyrics. You couldn't do that before the internet. Really, if you heard a song on the radio and you weren't sure who the artist was, all you could really do was ask your friends, mention the song to your friends and say, hey, I heard this song on the radio, it kind of went like this, and maybe if you recalled a few of the lines from the song, you could tell them, and maybe one of them would know the artist. Or maybe you could call up the radio station and ask them, and maybe they could tell you. But that wasn't totally guaranteed. So yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around it today, but in the days before the internet, it was a lot harder to find out information like that. Now, something that's very important that we all have to keep in mind, that back in the day, there was a lot of minor hits. Songs that got a little bit of radio play, some radio play, but they weren't huge hits. They may have been played on your local radio station a handful of times and then they were never played again. Now, I can tell you, one of my local radio stations, every Saturday morning, they play a classic episode of Casey Kasem's American Top 40 from the 80s. And I usually consider myself quite an expert when it comes to 80s music. But one thing I've noticed is that starting the countdown at number 40, from about number 40 to about number 30, it's very common to hear songs that I don't know, or songs that I'm hearing for the very first time. Songs that I missed way back when. Again, these were minor hits. Hits that a few people might remember, but many people probably don't. Also, another factor to keep in mind is sometimes a lot of regional stuff would be played. Stuff that only people in a specific town or a specific state or province would be familiar with, and maybe even only people in a specific area of that province or state or a specific town. So when you would factor in regional stuff that was only known to a very localized market, you're upping the ante for the mystery factor. Also, another thing to really keep in mind is back in the day, it was quite common for DJs not to give the name of the artist. Often they did. I would say a fair amount of the time they would tell you who the artist was, but not always. There were many cases when they didn't. Now, I'm going to share a story with you about a specific song from my childhood that I just happened to record onto a cassette tape. The song I'm referring to is called Finger on It, and this was by an artist named Robbie Ray, a Canadian artist. Now, looking back, this was around 1983. I remember my local radio station only played this song for 1 week. Seriously, I only remember that song being played for a very, very brief amount of time, basically 1 week. And I just happened to catch it. I had a cassette in my portable stereo. The song came on, I very quickly hit record, and I happened to record it. It was probably only played a handful of times during that week, but I was lucky enough to catch it and record it one of the times that it was played. And I was also very lucky that at the end of the song, the DJ said that was Finger on It by Robbie Ray. He gave the name of the artist, and I was able to catch the name of the artist on the cassette tape. Now, I have mentioned this song to many, many, many people over the decades. Dozens and dozens of people, even hardcore music geeks, hardcore 80s geeks, and nobody remembers this song. Absolutely nobody. I've never had anybody say to me, yeah, I remember that song. No, nobody ever remembers it. Now, this song is on YouTube. You can look it up. I'll actually put a link to it at the end of this video. Again, it's called Finger on It by Robbie Ray from 1983. And it is on YouTube, and it has been viewed a fair amount of times, but certainly not millions and millions of times. So if it's only been viewed a few thousand times, that tells me that only basically a handful of people around the world, like myself, remember this song, but many people do not. Now, keep in mind, as I mentioned, the DJ did give the name of the artist, but what if they hadn't? Let's just imagine that they hadn't, and all these years I had that cassette with that song on it, and all these years until the internet came along, I would probably have no clue who the artist was. And even with the internet, if you type in the lyrics to an obscure song or a little known song, the lyrics aren't always findable on the internet. And that basically brings up my next point. There are lots and lots of songs on the internet, millions of songs on the internet, millions of songs on YouTube, but not all of them. If you go back to the beginning of the rock era, starting in around the 1950s or so, there have been millions and millions of albums and millions of songs recorded and released. Some of these albums went on to become big hits, and some of these albums sold in the millions, and some of these albums had songs that whole generations of people are familiar with. But there are still many more albums that have been released in the rock era that nobody remembers at all, nobody is familiar with. They didn't achieve any success at all. They went on to become very obscure artifacts from the past. In a nutshell, there have been thousands and thousands of albums released worldwide that have not gotten any airplay whatsoever, or any exposure they did get was very, very minimal, or very regional, or very limited. Like I said, Finger on It by Robbie Ray only getting played a handful of times during 1 week in my childhood. Basically, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the transition from analog to digital happened relatively quickly. When you look at the big picture, it happened in a very few years. that transition. And analog was the dominant force, the dominant medium for decades and decades. So if you keep in mind that there are still millions of songs that have not been digitized yet and may never be digitized, that even ups the factor even more, that there are probably still thousands of songs out there that are kind of lost. And if they got played today, there'd probably be many, many people who couldn't tell you the name of the artist of that particular song. Just think about it. All these thousands and thousands of songs just kind of floating in the ether. Again, as I mentioned, on various cassettes and reels of tape, tucked away in a dusty box in someone's attic for decades and decades. I'm sure there are countless cassettes out there that have many, many songs on them, many mystery songs. And again, there were probably many, many factors that contribute to a song becoming a mystery song. And especially if we think of our example of Like the Wind, there are all kinds of different factors. If you think about a local radio station that was only able to be listened to in a very specific area, how many people were listening at that specific time that that song was played? What time of day was it played? If it was played late at night, there was probably a much smaller number of people who were listening to the radio at that time. How many people were recording at that time? Probably not that many. So again, there's many, many different factors that go into this. It's a fascinating case, and it's a very complicated case, this whole thing about the most mysterious song on the internet. Basically, in closing, what I'd like to do is make a prediction. I predict that there's going to be another mystery song, another worldwide mystery song that's going to make its way to the internet. Someone's going to post a song on the internet sometime down the road saying, hey, does anybody know who the artist is for this song? And it's eventually going to go all around the world, just like the Wind. And maybe people will know, maybe someone will know who the artist is. And I'm sure, again, we're probably never going to see another example like the Wind. I really doubt we'll see an extreme case like that where it's going to take decades and decades to figure out who the artist is. But I do predict it is going to happen again, and there will be many more mystery songs coming in the future. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave a comment. What do you think of all this talk about the most mysterious song on the internet? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, give us a thumbs up, and as always, please subscribe to the channel. It's always greatly appreciated. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.